afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our last and our final, I guess last and final is the same thing, in our series of 10 cybersecurity webinars. We've been through quite a series here over the last couple of months, and everything from how to prevent an attack, tools involved, and so on and so forth. And today is the big finale of what's my protection, my backup, my plan if I do suffer some sort of cybersecurity breach. And we've kind of saved the best the last, a little cyber insurance discussion here. As per usual, this is a Q&A session, so please put your questions up in the question and answer section. We've got Joel Lausen here from, hopefully that's how I pronounce your name, Lausen?
Yeah, Lausen, yeah.
Lausen, there we go. He's from Coalition Inc., a global insurtech leader specializing in cybersecurity and cyber insurance. He's got a lot of experience here, and he's going to answer a lot of questions about our cyber insurance things here. Anything to say here, Joel, before we hit the Q&A? Because the Q&A goes pretty quick, and we're already 3 minutes after 3. So
just wanted to say thank you for having me. Excited to be here. As Trevor mentioned, my name is Joel Lausen, business development with Coalition Inc. I'm business development for Alberta and the Prairies here in Canada. We are a global insurtech leader, most recently noted as the largest insurtech in the world through the premiums that we write for cyber and tech E&O. So I would say let's kick it off.
So you probably know a little something about cyber insurance. So
we
got our first question here coming up here, and the questions are coming thick and fast. And this, I'm actually going to choose one that came in second here because it's kind of the most basic. It's why does my company actually need cyber insurance? How likely is it that I'm going to actually need it? Like kind of statistically speaking, because nothing's ever happened to us before.
Right. That's an excellent question, right? And it's something that we hear all the time. Companies that think, why would we be a target, right? We're not big enough. We wouldn't be lucrative enough for somebody to target us. But through our internal claims data, what we're seeing is ransom demands continue to increase, not only in the amount of ransoms that threat actors are requesting, but also in terms of claims frequency. So within Coalition, who's some of the best in the market, our claims frequency is approximately 2.5%. In North America, otherwise, it's closer to 9% of companies that will suffer some sort of cybersecurity breach throughout any 1 year period. And that doesn't even account for any uninsured type of losses as well.
So that's just statistically the ones that were insured, kind of a 1 in 10 companies.
Yeah, exactly. And we're finding that small businesses are disproportionately impacted, right? As attacks become more automated, right? It becomes easier and more profitable for threat actors to be targeting these smaller companies. You're not necessarily a target for your size and potential payoff, but target in terms of opportunity, where the ease of the breach for the threat actor as well. And specifically for small businesses with less than $25 million in revenue, right? We've seen an uptick in severity of 56% in terms of overall claims cost, and an uptick in terms of frequency of 40% from year over year, from 2020 to 2021.
So there's a question here that kind of leads from this then. Is there industry sectors or types of businesses that seem to get more targeted? Like, do you guys have statistics like that?
We do. Some of the ones that we see most often, educational institutions, mainly because the amount of users that they have accessing their individual platforms from day to day, and they tend to just be a little bit slower, or they just don't have the budget, right, to invest in that IT infrastructure and security. So educational organizations for sure, healthcare as well. A lot of that stems from the US, mainly in terms of the sensitive information that they would have on hand. So those might not even necessarily be a case of ransomware, right? But in terms of data exfiltration threats from a threat actor, right?
Right. We talk about ransomware all the time, but those cybersecurity attacks can be just about anything.
Absolutely, absolutely. And we've also seen an increase in the different types of attack vectors, meaning as soon as somebody gains a foothold into the system, right, there's multi-directional attacks that are happening now as well.
Right. Here's a little more specific question. What are some of the requirements to get cybersecurity insurance?
So for my company, in the way that we underwrite, and there is, I'll say there's probably 500 individual data points that we look at when evaluating companies. And I will do my absolute best not to list those here, but I'll break it down to a few different categories. So first, right, we look at your company profile in terms of your industry class, revenue, number of employees. Right, then we take an external view of your organization's online presence. So just by giving us your website and your email domains, right, we're able to perform through IP aggregation and enumeration, right? We develop a picture of what your company's external attack surface looks like through the lens of a threat actor, right? So we're underwriting directly to the tech stack that a company uses. And thirdly, for more sophisticated, or sorry, for more complex type risks, we may ask for a questionnaire that asks for what specific controls your company might have in place in terms of having an EDR solution, right? Any type of email filtering, having adequate network segmentation, having proper procedures in place for patching procedures, and also having a business continuity plan.
Would, sorry, and I'm going to actually ask this as an extension of this. Oh, and I totally lost my train of thought. My apologies. Would it affect the pricing of the insurance, the types of things you have in place? Let's say you have an endpoint detection system. You've got two-factor authentication. You don't have a bring your own device policy. Like you're pretty locked down. Would that affect cost of insurance for a company?
Absolutely, it definitely would. We've only very recently started asking questions regarding MFA, and there's three things that we're worried about, right? We asked, do you have MFA for email accounts, for remote access, and for privileged accounts or administrator type access, right? So it's not, we don't strictly require it of every company because, right, small mom and pop pizza shop on the corner probably doesn't need MFA. For a $25 million law firm, absolutely necessary. And all of those kind of filter back into our rating process for risks.
Right. Perfect. No, that's good to know. Another question here. Is there different insurances that cover different situations, or is it just a business continuity that is covered? So if it's difference between ransomware or it's an email communication intercepted and then somebody transfers money, or and then what do you have to prove or disprove to get covered within that insurance policy?
Right. So it's important when evaluating any insurance quotes that come back from your broker, right, to look at, there's three distinct sections. So there'll be third-party liability, right, something that you might be liable for in the event of a breach on your system, right? Any third-party type of information that's potentially, sensitive, or somebody's going to have a problem with it if it's released, any type of payment card information, that type of thing, notification costs to those third parties, and, potential credit monitoring in the future. So that's the first section, third-party liability. Second, first-party costs. And this is something that's particularly important. It's not going to be covered under your normal property and casualty type policy that has a little bolt-on endorsement that says we cover some cyber there. First-party costs are not what they're covering, right? And that includes breach response costs and breach response services. So to get somebody actually on the ground investigating what's happening or what's happened, what was the attack vector, how did this person get in, how do we get them out, how do we prevent access in the future, and what did they look at or what did they take while they were in there. So that, along with any type of actual ransomware type demands that could be made, all of that would fall under your first party costs.
Right.
And lastly, would be cybercrime, which includes funds transfer fraud, and any type of social engineering that's done over any type of digital communication device.
Right. It's interesting. I got two questions here that are kind of going to go hand in hand that kind of follow from this. One of them is, if I get ransomed and the insurance company pays the ransom, am I guaranteed to get my data back? And I think we kind of know the answer to that in some ways. But how will cyber insurance help me get my business back up and running after a ransomware attack, if there's more things like that?
Right. And that's something that we pride ourselves in, not just as Coalition, but as part of the wider cyber insurance industry, is getting companies back up and running as quickly as possible. So our in-house claims team, as soon as they receive a call that something might be going on with the customer's network, they will immediately set up what they call a scoping call to determine, right, is this attack still ongoing? Is it something that happened over the weekend? Did you show up Monday morning and weren't able to access your computers or anything like that? And then to determine what are next steps that are needed, and that's where our incident response team comes into play, right? They will look at if you have any type of your most recent backups, right? When were they last tested for compatibility? Is this something that can relaunch your system, get you back up and running as soon as possible, right? And that's what we aim to do as a cyber insurer, right? We're very hands-on in that way. We don't mean to, just throw a bunch of cash at a threat actor and assume that the problem is solved. We're very hands-on in getting a company back up and running because, right, ransomware demands aside, business interruption costs are so overlooked from so many people in terms of, right, if you showed up to work on Monday and your computer wouldn't turn on, you didn't have access to any type of customer database or any type of operational programs, how much work would you actually be able to do? And if that's during a busy time, right, you can probably quantify that number if you were down for a week, and that number would not be small. So that's what we aim to do, is help companies get back up and running as soon as possible.
Right. That's impressive to have that sort of technical backup there. That's actually really good because, lots of times, I don't know, I guess like relate it back to car insurance, you hope that there's somebody to help you through the whole, find an auto body shop and do all of that kind of thing. But you don't think about that in terms of necessarily cyber insurance. But it sounds like you guys have that covered as well. So that's actually really good to know. And I'm sure that for our attendees, it's fairly comforting to know that that's a support, on that side.
Absolutely. And sorry, just hopping back to the first part of that question, are you guaranteed to get your data back in the event of a ransomware type attack? How the mechanics of that usually work is the threat actor on the other side, likely through some type of Tor browser web chat, will provide you a sample of the files that they've encrypted, and then they'll provide you a sample of the decoder that they have in place that they will release to you in the event that a final number for a ransom is eventually paid. But of course, right, do you always pay a ransom? That is a whole conversation. So I mean, we could blow through the rest of the time talking about that if we
Maybe
wanted
we have to hold a whole other
yeah,
session. Maybe
so we
do an
might hold that
an
one.
hour and a half on this, at some point in the future. So I think we've kind of touched on a little bit on this, but how large should a company be before they're looking at cyber insurance? For example, would a small company with 2 or 3 employees need to be worried about cyber and security insurance, or could they afford it? Like, I guess maybe that's part of the cost factor, and obviously it depends on different things. But how large a company would kind of need to be looking at this.
And it's a pretty common misconception that cyber insurance has to be exorbitantly expensive, right? That being said, we have policies in place that are a couple $100 for companies that are sole proprietors. So
Okay.
as individual owners or CEOs or CFOs, right, take a thoughtful look at how your company is digitized, how much you rely on technology to run your business, right? And if that wasn't available or something went wrong, right, could you afford to continue operating or be able to rebuild your systems on your own, right? Or is it worth potentially purchasing that $1,000 policy, that $1,500 policy for $1 million to keep you covered?
Right, absolutely. That's that was another question I had personally had. Is it's been suggested that organizations have a minimum $1 million coverage, and that was I don't know. I guess that totally depends on the size of the company and the revenue model and what they're trying to protect.
Yeah, it's that's a pretty good rule of thumb, because ransomware demands aside, there's lots of different facets to a claim and costs that can rack up pretty quickly as soon as one is reported. Even just getting a forensics team on retainer, if your insurer doesn't have an in-house one, can be a 50 grand flat fee immediately. Then you have, right, things in terms of retaining breach counsel, right? Is there going to be anything required by law in terms of notification costs for customers, or is there anything voluntary that your company wants to be notifying for? Is there business interruption costs that are associated with this breach, right? Credit monitoring for any potentially impacted customers, as well as right, is there going to be any potential drop in net income from having to simply just release a statement to the public saying that we have had a breach, we are handling it, this is what we know it's affected so far, this is what we can tell you, we'll update you further later on down the road. Right, there could be a significant drop or loss in confidence in terms of brand value. So that's something that our policy also aims to cover.
Right. So, well, following from this now, here's another question. Does cybersecurity insurance cover physical security failures? For example, someone physically breaking into a data center and getting access to a server or damaging it, or would it only cover remote access?
So most insuring agreements should be fairly broad, and any type of triggers for first or third party costs should simply state that a breach has occurred, and it purposefully doesn't define how that breach happens, right? So if there is right, in terms of somebody physically gaining access to a server room or something like that, that would constitute as a breach and would be picked up by the policy.
Right. Okay, that sounds interesting. Now, well, here's maybe a short one. I heard that if a staff member at my company is tricked into paying a fraudster, that cyber insurance doesn't cover that. Is it true?
False. That's something we specifically aim to cover under our funds transfer fraud section. Now, we do have something that we ask when we're underwriting, where we ask for a callback procedure, or what we call dual control for funds, for fund transfers in excess of $25,000, meaning for those larger type transfers, what we're trying to avoid is people sending out large transfers in a vacuum, right? So say an executive assistant to the CFO or CEO gets an email from the exact email address they always deal with, looks like the right invoice amount. They say, all right, here's your monthly invoice. Actually, our banking information's changed. This is where it needs to go now. So it's great, sends off the transfer, gets a call the next day. How come you didn't pay your invoice? Right. And most often than not, it's actually the third-party vendor that's been compromised. There's somebody sitting in the shadows, reading, watching these emails. They have specific email inbox rules set up on that third party so that they're not seeing any of that correspondence between them and their customers. Right. And that's how those a lot of those fund transfers end up happening. Luckily, we've gotten much, much better at responding with speed and with local authorities and banks, whether that be the FBI, CIA, or the RCMP, right, to freeze those funds while they're in transit. So we have sublimits of up to $250,000 of cover available for inadvertent fund transfer frauds. We get up to 65%, on average, 65% of those funds back when we're alerted of them early on in the process.
That's impressive, actually. Now, let me see here. Here's one. Actually, I couldn't remember these acronyms, but the PIPA and the Personal Information Protection Electronic Documents Act and Privacy Information Act state that they could fine companies up to $100,000 per private record that they lose in a breach. How often are companies actually fined, if you even know that? How can they mitigate the fine if they do have a breach, or avoid it, like kind of prove that they had all of this set up and they did everything they needed to do? And last part, will cyber insurance cover that fine?
Right. So I don't have any specific statistics on how often fines are actually levied. I don't believe there is a requirement for negligence for them to levy a fine against companies, meaning,
okay,
even if you had security in place, right,
yeah,
you're the one collecting this information. You are absolutely responsible for it,
right,
no matter how it gets out. And thirdly, yes, cyber insurance does cover fines and penalties. Authorities.
That is actually really, really good. Really good to know. Now, let me see here. I have so many questions here. I'm trying to get stuff that covers as much of kind of a broad range here, and we've got 6 minutes left here. So, are the insurance requirements for insurance based on the revenue of the company, or the amount of the insurance they're asking for, or both?
Sorry, I don't know if I quite understand.
Sorry, they're looking for are there costs of the insurance based on the revenue of the company, or on the specific amount of insurance they're looking for in terms of what they think is at risk?
Yeah. So cyber insurance is still a voluntary cover, right? In most cases, unless you have a master service agreement with a vendor that requires a certain amount. So it's totally up to you in what limit that you want to choose to purchase. Of course, we vary our rating based on the almost in a $1 million staggered limit approach, where we know most of these costs are going to be, or the most likelihood of the largest claims we should see, which should be in that first kind of 1 to 2 to 3 million. You will receive some savings if you go higher than that, right? So a $5 million or $4 million limit shouldn't be exactly 2 times what the $2 million limit is. Things like that. And in terms of the size of the company, yes, absolutely, revenue does play a part in our rating process. Again, it's one of many different factors that we take into account.
Great, good. That's good information. Are there any specific incidents that are excluded, such as if a company has a bring your own device policy and then the breach happens via an unencrypted employee device? Is there anything like that where you go, yeah, sorry, that wasn't covered because of your company policies?
Unless there's any specific, and again, I can't speak for every insurer on the market. We don't have any specific built-in exclusions for bring your own device. We're aware of how the world operates now, and are fully expecting that most companies would employ some type of bring your own device policy, and the conditions of the insurance contract will depend, right? Do they require MFA to be enabled on those own personal devices, right? That's something that we might ask for, might require, depending on the size of the company, the number of employees that you have, right? So 2 to 3 employees, different than 500 employees bringing their own devices.
So there's a certain part of advisory from what you guys do too. You kind of go, hey, here's a few things we need you guys to do as a part of this, or you should do as a part of this. So there's a certain amount of it is advisory as well.
Absolutely. And it's very much right, us trying to help insureds get to that point of insurability. A lot of times it is a binary type equation, right? If you don't do this, or you don't have minimum security protections in place, we might not be able to come on risk. But at the same time, we'll be able to tell you exactly what we need to have in place in order for us to put an insurance contract in place.
Right. Any statistics as to what the average cost is of a ransomware attack in Canada?
So I do have aggregated North American data at the moment, but at the same time, cybercrime does not heed any type of territory restrictions, right?
Right.
So what we've seen in the last half of 2021 is an increase of 20% of the average ransomware demand, up to $1.8 million. That's not what we pay. The average payment for a ransomware demand, if a ransomware is, or a ransom demand is paid, is closer to $200,000, which I believe is the same statistic that you guys have on file.
Right. We are down to the last 2 minutes here. Let's see if we can get through. This one may open a whole can of worms. Hopefully it doesn't go too far, but in the event of a cyber breach, what are the mechanics from reporting to next steps? Like, what's my first, do I call you guys first? Hey, I can't get into my stuff. Do I call the RCMP first? Do I, what's kind of the mechanics of getting things rolling to get things recovered?
Yeah, I would say call us very first. We are the proverbial 911 in the event anything goes wrong, right? In terms of a car accident or a fire, right? There's public services available. If you call the police department and say you've been hacked, they'll probably tell you to unplug your computer, right? So we want to be that very first call for the insureds. And as I mentioned earlier, we set up a scoping call, determine what's happened, determine if anything needs to be air gapped or any like really time sensitive critical items, and move forward from there. But absolutely, of course, please call us first. And a lot of people don't realize all those services are included in the insurance package.
Right, that's awesome. We are at the end of our time here, and I think I have a few more questions here sitting here. But what we'll do is we'll communicate those questions with you and get some answers on those after the fact, and then we can email people. But we want to respect the time here, and I want to thank all of the attendees for attending here. I don't know how many of you got to attend all 10 of the webinars, but all of the webinars are still, they're linked on our site and you can access them via YouTube. and they're available for any sort of education purposes. And then if anybody wants to talk to Joel more about cybersecurity insurance, absolutely, we'll make sure that that his contact information is made available as well. And you know, because it sounds like you have a pretty good handle on all of this.
No, thank you very much for having me. It was a rapid fire session for sure.
Yeah, this was good, very educational. So thanks very much, everybody. Have a great rest of the day, rest of the week, and then long weekend. And hopefully we'll see you on a new webinar series coming up here that I'm sure we'll be announcing in the new year. And I believe we have one more webinar, big one, coming up in October. We'll be sending that out to all our list of attendees, and we'll get the topic and all of the details to you as soon as we have it fully planned out. And that one hopefully will be in person. Thank you, COVID, for letting up just a little bit. So that's very exciting for us. So thanks very much, Joel, and thanks to everybody attending. Have a good rest of the day.